They say the queen died by the blade, a swift, clean end. But her true death was far more brutal. Her spirit was murdered long before her body, hollowed out by a silent weapon, psychological torment. For 76 final days, Marie Antoinette endured a calculated campaign. Revolutionaries, precise as surgeons, sought the thin places in her armor, determined to shatter her utterly. They tried hunger, public scorn, crushing loneliness. Yet she remained regal, impossibly composed, her royalty a shield against despair. But they knew her true vulnerability. She could not defend her children. It began deep in the night, within the temple prison. Paris outside sweltered, but inside, Marie Antoinette lay awake. Her hand rested protectively over the small chest of her 8-year-old son, Louis Charles. He was the last fragile ember of her old life, a beating reminder she was still human. Then came the sound. Heavy boots, echoing with menace, climbing the spiral stairwell like a drumbeat of doom. She sat up instantly, every nerve humming. The door exploded inward. 6 guards poured into the room, their torches casting monstrous shadows. One held a decree from the Committee of Public Safety. Cold words on paper that would break her faster than any blade. They had come for her son. Louis Charles stirred, confused, his eyes heavy with sleep. Marie Antoinette reacted not as a queen, but as a mother, beyond fear. She lunged, shielding him with her entire body. Her voice, raw and primal, ripped through the tower. She begged, bargained, threatened, pleaded for them to take her instead. For 1 agonizing hour, she fought them like a cornered beast. This was no raid, it was strategy. They weren't just taking her child, they were tearing away the part of her she couldn't survive without. This, she knew, was only the beginning. Her condemnation began long before prison, not by a court, but by a nation hungry for a villain. Her destruction didn't start in a cell, it began decades earlier. A shy 14-year-old Maria Antonia of Austria crossed into France, into a world waiting to hate her. In Vienna, she was playful. In France, innocence became ammunition. Married to Louis XVI for alliance, not love, she was instantly an enemy symbol. Whispers at Versailles began. She walks wrong, she laughs wrong, her French sounds like a child's. Louis ignored her. Their marriage unconsummated for 7 long years, her isolation deepened. The palace became a gilded cage. She fled into distraction, elaborate gowns, masked balls. Every indulgence was twisted. France starved, needing blame. She became Madame Deficit. The caricature was easier to hate than the real woman. The real woman lost her firstborn son to consumption. The real woman watched her husband, gentle Louis, dragged to the guillotine. The real woman clung to her 2 surviving children inside a fortress tower while mobs screamed for her blood. By motif 793, the playful girl from Vienna no longer existed. In her place stood a grieving widow, a mother fighting to keep her family alive. This broken, exhausted Marie Antoinette was whom the revolutionaries chose to utterly destroy. The Temple Tower was never a home, it was a tomb. After the monarchy collapsed, they sealed her and her 2 children within its medieval walls. They believed time, isolation, and sorrow would finish what the guillotine had not. The air inside was perpetually damp, cold, even in summer. Water trickled down the stone like sweat. At night, wind moaned through narrow slits, carrying the distant roar of mobs. Nothing was louder than the suffocating silence in the rooms where a mother tried to pretend her world had not already died. Marie Antoinette clung to routine as a lifeline. She taught her children by candlelight, whispered prayers, braided her daughter's hair. She held Louis Charles whenever nightmares tore through his fragile sleep. Every moment was an attempt to convince them they were still a family. The guards made sure she never forgot they weren't. They were everywhere, two in the doorway, one scribbling notes, another listening through the iron lock. They documented everything. A tear wiped too quickly, a lesson spoken too softly, a German lullaby murmured. German was forbidden. Their private language, their last sanctuary, stripped away. The guards watched with cold patience. They saw what revolutionaries suspected. Marie Antoinette could endure hunger, humiliation, exhaustion, but not fear for her children. Each time a guard raised his voice near the boy, she flinched. Each time they questioned her daughter, she stiffened like a drawn blade. So restrictions tightened, locked doors, delayed meals. Visits became arbitrary privileges. With every new rule, her world shrank further. What they failed to grasp, the smaller her world became, the fiercer she grew within it. But they were about to attack the one place no mother can fortify. They were preparing to strike at her children again. The night of July 3, 1793, did not begin with screams. It began with a faint vibration, a tremor. Then the rhythm of boots hammering against the stone stairwell. Climbing steadily toward her door. Her breath froze. Louis Charles slept curled against her side, unaware his childhood was about to end. Marie-Thérèse stirred, whispering her mother's name. But the footsteps were upon them. Heavy, purposeful, merciless. The door flew open like lightning. 6 guards surged in, torches flaring, shadows splintering. The man at the front held the decree, sealing an 8-year-old child's fate. They said he was to be taken for re-education by the Republic. But Marie Antoinette instantly saw the truth. They had come to destroy her from the inside out. She wrapped her arms around Louis Charles so quickly the boy didn't understand. Then the room erupted, guards shouting, a marble rolling, Marie-Thérèse crying. But over everything rose one sound, Marie Antoinette's scream. Not the scream of a queen, not the scream of a prisoner, the scream of a mother who knows, with gut-wrenching certainty, she is about to lose her child forever. She fought with every ounce of strength, threw herself against guards, kicked, clawed, begged for them to take her life instead. One guard tried to pull the boy. She sank to the floor, clutching him like a drowning woman clutches air. For a full hour, 60 agonizing minutes, she held the doorway against 6 men. But even a mother's fury has its limits. Her strength shattered, her grip loosened, and the guards tore Louis Charles from her arms as he screamed for her. His small hands reached back into the darkness where she collapsed. His cries spiraled down the stairwell, fading long after he was gone. They delivered him to Antoine Simon, a brutal revolutionary who beat the boy, starved him, and poisoned his mind with their lies. These lies included the most monstrous accusation of all. In that moment, Marie Antoinette did not just lose her son. She lost the last fragment of her world that was still alive. The deepest circle of hell had indeed opened. At 2 in the morning on August 1, 1793, a violent pounding shook her cell door in the Temple Tower. Before she could gasp a breath, guards flooded in, silent, efficient, carrying no explanations, only brutal orders. Marie-Thérèse screamed for her mother. Marie Antoinette lunged towards her daughter, but a guard blocked her path. There were no farewells, no final embrace. One moment she was a mother, the next a prisoner dragged into the pitch black. They pulled her down the spiral stairwell, her bare feet slipping on the cold stone. The carriage waiting outside was not the closed transport granted to royalty. It was an open wooden crate on wheels.
Lit by a single torch swaying through the silent, sleeping streets, it looked like a hearse made of splinters. Paris slept as they delivered her to the place every condemned soul feared most, the conciergerie. It was the antechamber to the guillotine. Inside, her world narrowed to a single cell, barely large enough to stretch her legs, 12 feet by 8. Damp stone walls streaked with mold, a straw mattress reeking of illness, a crude wooden table, 2 chairs. One candle sputtered against the encroaching darkness. She was no longer Marie Antoinette. She was prisoner number 280. They offered her a folding privacy screen, as if she might still cling to modesty. For a heartbeat, she almost believed it was mercy.
Then she saw the truth. 2 armed guards sat in her cell at all hours. They watched her eat, watched her shiver, watched her bleed through clothes she was too ashamed to ask to change. They watched her undress behind the useless screen that hid nothing from their ears. Her health collapsed swiftly. Hemorrhaging racked her body. Her hair, once chestnut brown, turned completely white in mere days. Her cheeks hollowed, her ribs pressed against the coarse prison gown. Still, she tried to hold herself upright. She knew the revolutionaries wanted her to break before they killed her. They wanted her to unravel, piece by excruciating piece. In the conciergerie, with death humming in the very stone around her, Marie Antoinette realized something chilling. They would not be satisfied until they shattered the last fragment of who she had been. By mid-October, the conciergerie had done its insidious work. Her body was failing, but her mind, despite everything, remained disciplined, alert, impossibly composed. This was the part the revolutionaries hated most. She would not crumble. She would not scream. She would not beg. So, they decided her death required something more than execution. It required public humiliation. Before dawn on October 14th, guards yanked her from her cell and marched her into the Revolutionary Tribunal. The courtroom, if it could be called that, was packed wall to wall. Journalists, spectators, furious citizens, all crammed together, their collective breath fogging the air. They hadn't come for justice, they came to witness her break. Marie Antoinette entered wearing the same plain black gown she had worn since her husband's execution. Gaunt, pale, her hair now shockingly white, she moved with the slow dignity of someone who knew her steps were few. Yet, when she sat down, her posture straightened, her chin lifted. She looked, impossibly, like a queen again. The prosecutor, Fouquier Tinville, began his assault. Conspiracy with Austria, manipulation of the treasury, plots against the state. Every word was designed not to prove guilt. Her verdict had been written long before she entered the room, but to paint her as a monster worthy of death. And yet, she answered each accusation with a calm clarity that unsettled the crowd. She admitted where she had erred. She rejected what was false. She spoke not as a queen defending power, but as a woman defending truth. So, the prosecutors revealed their final weapon. A witness stepped forward, carrying a parchment. The room shifted, like a creature holding its breath. It contained the statements forced from her 8-year-old son. Lies beaten and starved into him. Lies he had repeated in terror. The accusation was unspeakable. Incest. Even the most vicious revolutionaries fell silent. A horrified murmur rippled through the hall. Marie Antoinette, who had endured months of torment without breaking, finally looked shattered. But she did not plead, she did not scream. Instead, she rose to her feet and turned. Not to the judges, not to the executioners, but to the women watching her. "I appeal to all mothers," she said, her voice trembling yet fierce. "Is there one who would not tremble at such a charge?" Tears filled the room. For the first time in months, Marie Antoinette's captors realized something terrifying. Even in ruins, she could still move a nation.
The verdict came at 4 o'clock in the morning. Marie Antoinette did not weep. She did not plead. She simply bowed her head, as if acknowledging what she had known all along. Her fate had been sealed before she ever stepped into the courtroom. Guards escorted her back through the narrow, echoing hallways of the conciergerie, the stones cold beneath her bare feet. For the first time in weeks, they left her alone in her cell. Dawn had not yet broken. Silence pressed down, heavy as a final blessing or a final curse. Then they placed a quill, a small pot of ink, and 4 sheets of paper before her. Marie Antoinette did not write to the nation, nor to history, nor to the revolutionaries who thought they had destroyed her. She wrote to one person, Madame Elisabeth, her gentle sister-in-law, still imprisoned in the temple with Marie-Thérèse. Her hand shook, but her words did not. She wrote of forgiveness, offered freely, even to those who had mocked her suffering. She wrote of her children, the 2 souls she would never see again. She begged Elisabeth to comfort her daughter and to remind Louis Charles of his father's final lesson: do not seek revenge. Every line carried the weight of a mother trying to leave a lifetime of love in a few fragile paragraphs. When she signed her name, her hand lingered. It was the last time she would ever write it. She folded the letter with meticulous care and handed it to a guard. He nodded. He lied. The letter was immediately confiscated, locked away, unread by the very people she wrote it for. It would vanish for decades, resurfacing only when every person she addressed was already dead. Hours later, the cell door opened again, this time not for writing, but for unmaking. They cut her hair, now entirely white, with crude shears. They stripped away her morning gown and forced her into a plain shift. Then they bound her hands behind her back, pulling the rope so tight it carved into her skin. She winced but remained upright. By late morning, she was marched into the courtyard and placed onto an open wooden cart. No curtains, no privacy, only Paris staring at her as if she were already a corpse. From a high window, Jacques-Louis David sketched her hollow face. The queen was gone. The mother was dying. But the woman, thin, pale, unbroken, refused to bow her head.
The cart rattled through Paris for more than an hour, creaking like a wooden coffin dragged toward its grave. Crowds surged against barricades, screaming insults, waving flags, hurling curses sharpened by years of hunger and propaganda. Marie Antoinette sat upright, hands bound behind her back, her thin white hair whipping in the wind. She did not bow her head. She looked directly at the people who had once called her queen. Some shouted with triumph, some spit at her as the cart rolled by. But some watched in silence, stunned by the hollow-eyed woman who no longer resembled the monster they had been taught to hate. At last, the tumbril reached the Place de la Révolution. The guillotine towered above the square, its red-stained wood gleaming under the noon sun. The roar of the crowd vibrated through the ground itself. The executioner waited beside the steps, arms crossed, preparing to guide her to the plank. Marie Antoinette rose slowly, her legs unsteady from hunger and illness. Yet she carried herself with the last remnants of royal grace. No guards took her arms, no one helped her. She climbed the steps alone, each footfall echoing like a final farewell. At the top, she turned toward the executioner. In the pressing chaos around the scaffold, a strange stillness settled between them. She stepped forward, and her bound feet slid across the wooden platform. She stumbled slightly, landing on the executioner's foot. For one heartbeat, the world stopped. Then she lifted her head and whispered clearly and gently, "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to do it." The final words of a dying queen were an apology, not to God, not to France,
but to the man ordered to kill her. Even the executioner hesitated, caught off guard by the quiet dignity of a woman who had been starved, humiliated, tortured, and stripped of everything she had ever loved. Moments later, they bound her to the plank. The lunette, the crescent-shaped piece of wood, closed around her neck, holding her head in place. The blade rose, gleaming ominously against the clear midday sky. 20 seconds after her unexpected apology, it fell. The revolutionaries took her crown. They took her husband. They took her children. They took her freedom. They took her very name, reducing her to prisoner 280. They stripped her of every earthly possession and dignity. They believed they had destroyed her completely. They paraded her severed head before the screaming crowds, a gruesome trophy of their absolute power. They sought to erase every trace of her from history, to make her a symbol of pure, unadulterated evil. But standing on that scaffold, facing death without hatred, Maria Antonia of Austria, the queen they called Antoinette, proved there was one thing they could never take: her humanity.
Her son, Louis Charles, known as Louis XVII, would die alone in the Temple Tower less than 2 years later, a victim of neglect and abuse at the age of 10. His small body, wasted and broken, would be buried in an unmarked grave. Her daughter, Marie-Thérèse, would survive the revolution, forever marked by the trauma. The sole royal survivor to carry the weight of her family's tragedy into a bitter exile. The letter Marie Antoinette wrote in her final hours, filled with forgiveness and love, would be confiscated and hidden for decades. It would resurface long after her sister-in-law, Elizabeth, and her children were all dead. In the end, this queen, who was hated for her lavishness and blamed for a nation's woes, faced her final moments not with the fury of a monarch, but with the quiet grace of a human being. Her story, stripped bare, becomes a stark reminder. Even when the world conspires to tear us apart, to define us by our failures or the hatred of others, we hold a final, unyielding sanctuary. It is the dignity we choose to maintain, the empathy we extend even to those who harm us, the unwavering core of who we are. That, like the last words of Marie Antoinette, is the one thing no power, no mob, no blade can ever truly conquer.